Great to have you listening in today. As with previous seasons, it is my hope that the guests and their stories that I get to share with you this season can provide you with the tools and or insights that you need to know that you can make it through whatever is happening for you now. And not only that, that you can have the life you want in whatever way you want that to look like. So let's get to it. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and this is the beautiful side of grief. Among the fear of death, another top fear is that of speaking in public or simply being able to communicate your thoughts and ideas effectively. Now, this may seem like a strange topic to be linked with grief, though bear with me, as I believe there are a few areas my guest today, Brenden Kumarasamy, did I say that correct, Brenden? Great, can definitely help us out with. I'm thinking like how to navigate the passing of someone very near and dear to you when you are so lost for words. You just don't know how to say or explain what has happened. Or you're having to deal with the police or the courts or financial institutions, people that you wouldn't typically deal with, especially around this subject matter, and how to get your point across that you really need to get across to them. Plus, there'll be more treasures as we get chatting. Although Brenden coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become the top 1% communicators in their industry, what I really love is his willingness to share his knowledge and communication tools freely with anyone, anywhere through his popular YouTube channel, MasterTalk. So the intention I'm setting for this episode is for you to pick up some easy-to-use tips to help you communicate more effectively, not only through your grief journey, also in your everyday life. Plus, as always, I'm sending you my thanks for listening in, along with loads of love and hugs. So, Brenden, it is an absolute pleasure to have you with me today to see and talk about how we can communicate just that little bit better.
Absolutely, Helen. The pleasure and honor is absolutely mine, so I really appreciate you having me on the show.
I feel like the privilege is mine. So I want to start with a quote that you've got on your profile stating, I believe that next Elon Musk is a 7-year-old girl who can't afford a communication coach. So it's my duty to help her succeed with my free resources. Why do you feel it's your duty to help anyone, anywhere? And where did that come from?
That's a beautiful question, Helen. I would say for me, where that came from was my mother. You know, my mom is an incredibly generous woman. And I remember when I was 10 years old, I'll tell you the story really quick. I found a $10 bill on the floor while I was waiting for a bus to go to school. And I got really excited because for me, $10 back then felt like 10,000. Where all the candies, all the amazing things I could buy. And I got home a few hours later and I told my mom about this story. Mom, I found $10 on the floor. The first thing she asked me, Helen, was, are you sure that's not somebody else's $10? And it wasn't, thankfully. I mean, I'm sure it was, but not next to me. And then she told me a story that forever changed my life. And she said, you know, Brenden, when I immigrated to Canada, it was like the 90s, I was walking around in snow. And the petite woman that she is, she's always looking on the floor to make sure she doesn't trip on anything. So she finds a $20 bill on the floor. And then she says something else. And she goes, and then I used that $20 bill to feed a family who couldn't afford to eat that day. But what was powerful about that story, Helen, was there was no point or lesson to the story. She said it as if, you know, it was a matter of fact. Like, oh yeah, like I just fed a family today and then I went to go get groceries. And that always just changed the way that I thought about life, even if we didn't have much growing up.
Oh my gosh, that is such a wonderful story. A beautiful story. And what a beautiful mum to grow up with all these, just like you say, just tidbits that just flow out of her mouth with not this is how you should be living or what you should be doing, but just this is how I live and I'm going to share it with you. Oh, so beautiful. Oof. Brenden, you've also had your own grief experience with your dad, haven't you?
Absolutely. So in my case, with my dad, yeah, he passed away 3 years ago, probably December, of 2019 from liver failure.
Oh, That's not very long ago. So, was it a long journey that with you guys, like knowing that he was very ill and going to pass on, or was it something that happened very quick and sudden for you? Because I think that does make a difference in how you prepare yourself.
I agree, Helen. So in our case, it was quick and sudden. Though I knew at some point he was going to pass. He was a very heavy alcoholic, so he's been drinking
Okay.
since like what, maybe 2005. So I knew his liver's in trouble. But to be honest, I didn't expect him to pass so suddenly. What had happened essentially was it was November of 2019, and all of a sudden he just couldn't feel his body. So we just rushed
Oh,
him to the hospital, and the doctor said he was going to be just fine. So we didn't really worry too much about it. He just had to stay in the ICU for like a few weeks. But then it started getting really complicated. They had a lot of trouble doing the dialysis for the liver, and it just failed. And then we knew after like a month or something. So it lasted around 30 days to 45 days that he just had to go.
yeah, that's pretty fast. And I know with my own dad, it doesn't matter how prepared you are, he suffered with lung issues for a long while. And we all knew that the days were they were numbered. Let's be honest. And he was on oxygen 24/7. When he went, it was still just as incredibly painful, even though you're prepared for it. Was that
I
how it
agree.
was for you?
Oh, most definitely. It was really challenging because the relationship I had with my father was not a very good one. We lived
Mm.
together in the same house for the last 10 years, and I never talked to him, even if we lived together. So it was me and my mom, my dad. I still live with my mom and my sister today, which we can get into why that is.
Yeah.
But the point I want to drive is I always actually hated my dad. We had a terrible
Mm.
relationship. And the reason is because he was very verbally abusive to my mom and my sister. So I just decided to shut him out of my life so I could focus on being successful. So actually a lot of my early successes in life was because of my dad. Because I always wanted to prove him wrong. I always wanted to show him that I could be somebody that he never thought I would be. And that's what drove me to get the result. But when he passed away, or when he was in that process, I realized that I was playing a rigged game. And the
Mhm.
reason I say that, Helen, is because the goal is never to beat my dad. He's the reason I was able to even create the life I've had, because he's the one who took the risk to immigrate from a third world country. He's the one who took 7 flights and hid $1,000 in his socks to make sure the customs officer wouldn't take that money. And I got started in a first world country. That's how my life began. So I owe a lot of my life to him. And I only realized that after he died.
Often in hindsight, we understand why we've been on the journey we've been on, all through all the hardships and struggles that we've had in our lives. And I think that's why I do this podcast, to share that with people, because like you say, you can get some really valuable things out of it, Brenden. So, Brenden, share with me. Let's just start talking about communication, because otherwise, I know we could just chat, 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 and never really get around to it. But what do you consider the main things that we need to know or understand about communication?
Absolutely, Helen. So I would say it's specific to the context and intention of the show. What I would say is specificity matters, especially in the context of grief. So what do I mean here? So when
Yes.
when my dad passed away, it was really tough for my mom, but also the people around us, because there's a lot of things to manage that just pop up all of a sudden, like the funeral, the different traditions, the different family members, the speeches you have to give. Like, it just creates this whole plethora of problems and situations that you don't really think of prior to that. So I think what's important is to, what I think, communicate healthy boundaries with the people around you. And I
Oh, I
feel
love that.
of course, when it comes to specificity, what I mean here is you don't want to just say to your family members, I just want alone times. You actually want to say specifically what you need from them and be very clear to make sure that you're actually getting the support that you want.
Yeah, so a good example of that is like, hey guys, I love that you all want to be around me and support me in that, but actually what I just need is a good couple of hours just in my own space. I'm not sure whether I'm going to have a sleep or what I'm going to do, but I just feel overwhelmed at the moment. So appreciate you being here for me, but can you just give me that space? Something like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's one great example. Another one I can give you is making a list of those different boundaries. Because I feel with a lot of us who aren't trained in communication, is we jump into those situations right away, and it's nerve wracking because they're like, oh, should we say that? What would people think of me if I? And we get into these beliefs around what we want to share, which is important to us. So what I would recommend is to sit down with yourself and to write them down on a piece of paper, because that way it becomes easier for you to articulate your thoughts and also get feedback on them, so that when you go back and you have those discussions, it's really easy. Of course, in our situation, it was a bit different because, since I studied communication, it was easy for me to ask the right questions to my mother, like, what do you need from me right now? Is there anything I can do to support you? And listen to her in that process so that we can grieve effectively and get across the finish line, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to be making, Brendan. What do you consider some of the words we should use or avoid in like highly emotional times and situations like these?
I would say words matter, but the most important thing is really our tonality. Our tonality. So
Yes.
what do I mean here?
Yeah.
So let's say when we're speaking, a lot of the times, especially in those situations, things can get a bit loud sometimes, right? So notice how the tonality has a big impact in the way that we're showing up with people. And this is called the plus minus. What it means is whenever you're talking to someone who's experiencing grief, always talk at a level that is just under their vocal tones. So that way you're not overpowering them in a conversation. So even if the words matter, I would say the tonality and how you go through that communication matters more. Example: how can I support you right now? What can I say? It's going to be really overwhelming versus, hey, Helen, just wanted to check in on you. Just use an example. Is there anything I can do to support you? So notice how there's a big difference, even if the words are the same, the tonality and how that's being received by the person is completely different.
The first one feels quite aggressive and I just want to, step back from it. And the second one made me feel safe, like you cared, and that's really all people want in this time too, is that to know that you're caring. And along with the tone, it's also body language, isn't it? Because communication is so much about body language. Let's talk about that, Brendan.
Absolutely, Helen. So in the context of body language, what I would always default towards, especially in the context of these types of conversations, the most important thing is to really keep your eye contact on the person that you're speaking to, especially the individual experiencing grief, and to keep your body language minimal and non-distracting. So if I'm having a super positive conversation, I'm always doing this with my hands and things like that. But that could be distracting to somebody who's experiencing grief. So I would say in that situation to keep the body language minimal, to nod your head slightly to show that you're listening, and to try your best to repeat what the other person is saying to show that you're paying attention, that they're heard. So for example, if somebody says, I'm really hungry. We didn't order any food tonight. You could reply with something like, hey, I'll take care of the food tonight. Let me just go and dial a number and get that sorted for us. So notice I'm paying attention, but I'm also taking action on what that person is saying to make sure they feel seen, heard, and understood. But the most important thing is to keep your presence and your attention on that person.
So is that why you need to keep the eye contact? Because many people don't. In conversations, if you notice it, like loads of people are busy, thinking about the next thing they're going to say or do or something like that, and not necessarily the person that they're actually talking to.
Absolutely, Helen. So I think part of this conversation is going to be some reactive strategies, which we're covering now, and then I'll cover some proactive strategies. What do we do with the relationships we have that are alive, so that we can practice? So we could talk about that, which I think will be helpful as well. But yes, I agree. There's actually a strategy I teach people for those who have the courage to do this. It's not that hard. It's just a little bit uncomfortable, but it helps you practice eye contact. I call this the endless gaze. So all you do is you pick somebody that you love in your house, and then you sit in front of them and you stare at them for 3 minutes without saying anything. So I've had married couples do this, and even they struggle with this. So it's challenging.
Yes.
But what it does is it helps you with that piece. So when I'm in person, I do workshops, and if it's very advanced, I usually don't do it a lot. But if I'm in that environment where it makes sense, I actually have random people sit in front of each other for 3 minutes, and it really helps with the eye contact.
That's a long time. And I bet the other people, if they're not aware of it, go, stop creeping me out. You're staring at me. Stop it. Yeah, anyway, I digress. So, I'm really interested in supporting people who suddenly, unexpectedly have to start dealing with like the police or the justice system unexpectedly through no fault of their own. And like some of those systems can be really tough to navigate. And when you're in grief, you don't always think very clearly. I certainly didn't. I felt like my brain was full of cotton wool. And even recently, when I had to be giving a statement, you just don't always think clearly. So what would you recommend for people who are dealing with these types of organizations to be able to communicate clearly, simply, and effectively?
Absolutely, Helen. So there's a couple of trains of thought that come to mind. So let's cover all of them. I would say the first one is the easiest way to deal with these situations is try and find someone from your network who has dealt with these systems in the past. I'll give you an example with me, a personal one, which is similar to not really justice systems, but for example, like going to a funeral house. Never done that when my dad passed away. But thankfully, we have a family member who kind of helps with the community when these things happen. So, and I know him very well. He's a good uncle of mine. So he helped me sort through that. So I actually didn't even have to think about it. So I could just focus on the next thing. And so having that, you don't really need an expert. Just having someone that, and this goes back to what we're saying around specificity at the beginning of this conversation. This is something you can ask. So you can go to your network. So when people say, how can you support you? The people really do want to support you. You could say, I'm actually looking for someone in that space. Can someone help me navigate this? Anyone been through it? And you'll usually be able to find somebody. That would be my immediate recommendation that will immediately get the Band-Aid that we're looking for. The other piece, though, is let's say that situation actually isn't the case. You don't have someone around you to help you deal with these situations. I would say the next best thing is to either find someone who's a great communicator to help you deal with this, or to just ask powerful questions. So I always like defaulting to, if I'm not sure of something, I just ask questions back. So even in the conversation we're having now, I'm letting your questions guide my own thought leadership, because out of the both of us, you're an expert in grief and I'm an expert in communication. So we're meshing both, but I'm really relying on your questions to help me navigate my own thought leadership. So in the same way that I'm doing this right now, I would have the people who are going through these sudden explanations go to those individuals and say, for example, you mentioned, let's say, Mr. Police Officer, that you like a statement from me. So a question would be like, what would a statement look like so that you would be happy with this, with what you're asking me to do? And then don't be shy to repeat. So when you said that, do you mean this? And then the police officer is usually very nice and professional, contrary to what the media has us believe. Like, most police officers I dealt with are great human beings. Right, they'll be able to and they're also trained. A lot of them are trained to not yell at you around these situations. So that's the other piece. And if it's if it's a very specific situation, you have to speak in front of a crowd, I would just have you write that statement down and practice it with a close friend of yours that is within your close inner circle, so that when you actually go out and present it, you're a lot less stressed out.
Yeah. So really, really, really good points there, Brenden. And I'm going to draw on a couple of them. So the last one about practicing what you're going to say. Gosh, that was my go-to all the time when I really needed to say something really seriously. I would just say it in my head over and over. So when I went to speak it, it just came out naturally. But also, I learned to speak it out aloud, not just in my head, because in my head it sounded perfect. I had it just flowing off. I had the right tone. I had everything. And when I actually went to say those same words out loud, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel natural. And so I had to say it several times just to get that flow so it didn't come out all awkward and stilted. So yeah, love that. Love that tip. The other thing about when you're speaking, like giving a statement or, just asking questions, I think a lot of us, when we come up against, the courts or the police or the justice system or financial institutions, we always feel that those people are above us and that we need to be guided by them, which isn't always the case. And I feel like, just learn to value that what you have to say or even the questions you have to ask are very, very important and valid. I don't know about you, but I just know that so many people lose their voice because they feel like, oh, that person must know. They're in this position, they must know, but they don't always know. So, what do you recommend? Do you recommend writing some things down, some quick go-to phrases and that so you can deal with those situations?
Great questions, Helen. So let's go tackle through a couple of things. Let's start with the presentation side first. I'll give a quick tip on that, and then we can jump into the conversations. So the presentation tip, I actually have a great piece of advice here that people can implement, which I call the jigsaw puzzle method. So communication is like jigsaw puzzles. Helen, you know those toy puzzles you see as kids?
I love them.
You love this. So this is
Yeah,
actually
harder
great.
the better.
This is actually great. So you're actually the perfect person to ask this question to. If you're working on a jigsaw puzzle, Helen, which pieces do you start with first and why?
Oh, always the frame. Always always do the edge pieces, find the four corners, find the edge pieces. And the one I'm doing at the moment is that you just did not know which way was up, which way was down. It was super, super difficult. So, yeah, real challenge. But yes.
Oh, you're like a professional puzzle. You're like a professional puzzle sports athlete. Okay, I love that. So let's assume a normal jigsaw puzzle, like the rectangle, okay. Right? So you're absolutely right. Corners. And you probably gave the best answer in the history of me asking this question. So you're right. So why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because most of the time in communication presentations, we generally start the middle, which is a mistake. So we shove a bunch of content in our presentation. We get to it and we ramble throughout the whole thing. So especially when it's the emotion is high in the context of grief, it becomes a lot harder because you have all this content that you need to say and you go boom, 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 and then you get worried and you're stressed and your emotions are at the highest. Not the best way to practice. Instead, what I recommend is practice like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. So when I gave a speech for my dad when he passed in front of like probably 70 or 100 people, I kept it really simple. I practiced the introduction first a few times. So I did it, 10, 15, 20 times, which is only like 30 minutes of practice, right? Because your introduction's 90 seconds. And then I'll do the same thing with the conclusion, where I would practice my conclusion 20 times. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Terrible movie, right? So same thing with the close. I would do that 15, 20 times, and then I'll work in the middle. And the reason this is great, a framework, is because it gives you momentum, Helen. So now imagine you have grief and you're creating the speech and you're like, oh my God, I have to write all of this. And then it gets stressful. The puzzle framework allows you to do it more efficiently. Like when I talked about, my dad's passing and the lessons I learned from that I think I spoke for like 5 minutes in that funeral home.
So A, I love jigsaws, and we're going to come back to that because, and B, when you were talking about, speaking, I also spoke for my daughter at her funeral. And I remember exactly doing that. I went and sat down and I wrote, how do I want to open it? How do I want to finish it? And then I just jotted some key phrases down so that I would just talk from my heart. So I didn't have it written out word for word. So I didn't have to lose my place or whatever. All I did is had some points to jog my memory about her, which wasn't hard because she gave me so many memories. So that was beautiful. She was a character, I tell you. And about the jigsaw, I liken my whole experience with losing her to doing a jigsaw. Like I was the type of person who needed all the pieces to fit in place. Okay. So I didn't want any missing pieces. So I was the type of person that needed to know what the police were thinking, what was happening at the funeral home, what she was going to wear. I wanted to be making all those decisions. I wanted to have awareness about everyone. And I had people around me who were trying to protect me. And I would hear about these things and I go, why don't I know about this? So I just needed all the pieces to fit together. But I know a lot of people are not like me. Thank goodness. Because honestly, I make life much, much tougher for myself than I need to sometimes. But yes, when you brought that up, that just instantly brought that back to me. So thank you, Brenden.
Of course. I'm not sure if that was helpful, but
well,
so
maybe
fun.
there's somebody out there listening who is like that. So yeah, no, it was very, very helpful. Look, I tell you what, you're just triggering, different memories with me, which is great. So, okay.
I'm glad. I'm hoping it's good.
Now, a lot of people in this day and age have to deal with things happening online. There is often a lot of communication that's coming online. But the one thing that I nearly got caught up in was that we had a couple of trolls and they were putting out all this information that was so incorrect about my daughter. And the temptation was to leap in and answer. But then I just thought, I'm just not going to give them my energy. But how would you deal with that whole social media aspect around communication? Because I think you've got a few tips for us there, haven't you?
Of course, Helen, happy to. I would say the most important thing is make a conscious decision as a family as to what you want the narrative to be online. Because for all of us, it's different. So for me, I made a conscious decision to actually not even post about it online. Because I just wanted to keep it private within the family, and that's just the way that I wanted it to go. But every family is different in the way that they share. So that's the first piece: is spend that time to just say, do we even want to mention this online? Is this important? Is this something we want to do, or do we just want to let friends and family know? So I'm a lot more private in that way, not on a podcast, but just in general in my life. So that was just a decision. So that way you control the narrative, you control your life, and you'll be able to push through this. The other piece, though, that you talked about, which is very important, is in situations where, for some aspects of grief, there might be negative messages, there might be trolling, there might be situations around this. So my tip is more around how we're being versus how we're communicating. And it starts with how we're being. And what I always like to do, because I get a lot of hate on my YouTube channel, which is funny if you think about it. It's like I make YouTube videos on public speaking. I never swear. I'm on a podcast talking about grief and communicate. So it's weird. But here's what I would say. I would say we need to understand where they're coming from. Even the most vicious people who are making comments, anyone who types something negative about somebody else is always coming from a dark place. It means that they have their cup is so empty that they need to fill it up through other people's energy, through other people's attention. So it's hard to do. It's hard to do all of a sudden, but it's a process we learn proactively of human beings, is how do we lead in a way that the person who passed away would be proud of, right? And that's the way that we need to think. How do we act in a way where the person that passed away would be proud of, whether it's online or offline? So what does that mean? That means blocking people whenever possible, right? Obviously, we don't want to deal with that energy. But the other piece is showing up in a way that the people around us would be happy with. And that means definitely not replying to those comments, because we're just feeding the oil to the gas and trying to find ways to simply cancel out that noise.
Yeah, such good points there. And it also made me think of something else, that happens a lot in grief. And, the reason I brought up the trolls in that was because my daughter's she was in an accident, and of course it was published in the paper. And then when the coroner's report came out, and then there was another went public, and that. So these were the people that I didn't even know from a bar of soap who just decided to chip in and add their 10 cents worth. And yes, and I'm glad, because resisted the temptation just to have to prove my point. But yes, don't give them any energy. That's it, and understand that they're coming from a very sad place. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which often happens, is that when you've just had someone very, very close to you pass away unexpectedly, like a spouse or or a partner of any description or a child, and you've got people who come along and start comparing their elderly grandparent to that loss, and it makes you so angry because you go, how can you compare your 95-year-old grandmother who has lived such an incredible life with the loss of my child at 18, And there are a lot of people that feel angry about people who do this. So again, what would your thoughts be around about how could we deal with that, Brenden, in a more effective way to not communicate that anger and that frustration?
Right. So I would start with this, Helen. I would start with the tonality, right, of her voice. It's all about the way we're communicating. Because I'm a big fan of not being afraid to have the hard conversations if it's really bothering somebody. So, for example, let's say we take that case because it's very relevant that you mentioned, right? 95-year-old dying versus like an 18-year-old. My goodness. But instead of reacting in a way that, once again, the person that we're grieving for, would they be proud of the way we interact with this person? That's my frame of mind always.
Yeah.
So instead, I would go to that person and I would say, and I would start with gratitude. That's the most important thing, because at least they're showing some care. Because worst of all is they just don't show up at all. Like, who are you again? Like that's the worst reaction.
Yeah.
At least they took the time to show up. So for me, where I would start is always from a place of gratitude. So whenever you enter these emotionally high conversations, always begin with commonality and gratitude, which is because we don't want to, I don't know what the right word is, but we don't want to not validate or misvalidate their emotions too, because they had somebody die too. A death is a death at the end of the day. So I would start by being the bigger person. Start with gratitude and say, first of all, I'm so grateful that you took the time. Let's just, once again, I'm just using it as an example. Helen, for being here in this space. You took time out of your busy schedule. You could have been, doing something else, and you chose to be here. And thank you so much for sharing the story around your grandma. I'm so sorry for your loss, because it's true. A loss is a loss. But then you can get into the feedback point. But it did make me feel a little bit uncomfortable because of the fact that my daughter was 18, and next time you just share that. I would really appreciate it if we discussed it in this way or that way, but I still very much appreciate you being here, and thanks so much for taking the time. But I think the most important part to my little messy frame right there is the most important piece is gratitude and acknowledgement of the loss, because they're trying to relate to you and you want to meet them halfway, but then give them the feedback after privately. Privately. Not publicly. Just bring them aside one-on-one if it really bothers you. Absolutely. And in your case, it totally makes sense in the scenario you just described to me.
That never bothered me personally. I just used myself as an example in that, because what I felt that was the same thing is that maybe that's the only frame of reference they have for loss in their life.
Correct.
And so what they're trying to do is trying to relate to me. They're trying to find a common ground and people honestly get lost for words and trying to express their grief and their sadness about what has happened. And they truly are often lost for words. And so that's why quite often these really inappropriate phrases would come out. And I love the way that you recommend managing that with gratitude, because I'm a great believer in that, full stop. And yes, and the fact that the people have made the effort to turn up and be there means that actually, no matter how messy they've managed it, their intention is a good one. Yeah.
1000%.
Thank you for that, Brenden. So what about if you need to speak in public? Like, there are some people who feel driven after a really huge loss for them that is often surrounded by tragedy, to then they feel compelled to become an advocate in the public eye, to speak so that other people have awareness around, the circumstances of perhaps that loss, whether that be around alcohol or speed, or it could be anything. But do you understand what I mean? They decide that they want to go and share those experiences publicly. But unless you're a public speaker, getting up in front of people is fraught with nerves. I mean, even I still get hugely nervous when I have to go and stand in front of a group of people. What would your recommendations be for those listeners who feel compelled to go on that journey?
So once again, I have different. If it was a different podcast, I'd give different advice. But here I'm going to tailor it a little bit. So it's very specific to your show. So the first thing I would say is before we even talk about public speaking, let's start with, are we processing our emotions effectively with what just happened? Because even, especially if it's fresh, so whether it's a therapist or whether it's people around you, it was really hard to talk about my dad 3-4 years ago. Now I do it without breaking down and going through all that stuff. But that takes a lot of emotional healing. So I don't want you to jump. People are listening. Just don't jump right away to be okay. I just want to share my story. Let's start with how we fully process the emotion of what happened, so that, like, for example, me and you are comfortable talking about our grief because we've processed it. That's the first piece.
Yes.
The second piece is, when you start your public speaking career, you don't have to share the story right away. You don't have to go straight into the grief. I say that with a smile because communication is supposed to be fun. The energy, not the story itself, because obviously it's a tragedy, but I meant more in the sense the energy we want to bring towards public speaking should be positive. So what do I mean by that? I mean, start by speaking on topics that you're very comfortable sharing. Start with, it could be a funny story. It could be a topic that you just love to talk about that has nothing to do with your personal circumstance. That's the training wheel bridge to being a pro. And then once you go through these two necessary and important steps, and we can talk about exercises we can do on a daily basis for those who want to pursue that, then the third piece is when we go into the personal story, I always recommend starting with a very small audience. So that way you're not stressed out, especially since the stories that you're sharing are going to enact some emotion in you and to the people you're speaking with. So for example, I would start with a smaller group of people. It could be 4 or 5 people, and you just practice it, and then you get really comfortable. Then I would encourage you to start taking on bigger stages. And that's what I do, is create your own stage. Do like a Zoom call where you share the story every 3 weeks, and then you can build up the momentum. But step 1 and 2 are very important before you go there.
Ah, yes. A few gold nuggets in that. That's very good advice. Thank you, Brenden. So let's go back. Okay. So how do we deal with nerves? You know what you want to say, and then your voice gets all shaky and you're hot and sweaty and your hands are clammy and you're talking too fast. You're speaking 100 miles an hour. How do you deal with those types of things?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say, and then I'll give some tips specific to that, Helen, is changing our energy around communication. So for me, I ask a very different question whenever I teach people comms, which is the following. How would your life change if you became an exceptional communicator? How would the world change if you became an exceptional communicator? These questions help us really combat a challenge that's even greater than fear and nerves, which is motivation, Helen. If we're not motivated to actually be great speakers, to share our message, whether it's in a small way or a big way, we won't actually focus on practicing and getting better. So because we need an excuse to actually overcome the nerves. So I would start there. That's one piece. The other piece is an analogy I want to drive. I don't think it's actually possible to remove your nerves. Even for me, I'm a little bit nervous on the show because I usually don't talk about grief and communication. I've done it a few times, in my life, but it's not, most of my comms is executive communication. So there's always nerves. It doesn't mean I can't speak on the topic, but there's always a little bit of nerves. Another funny one I always talk about is, let's say me and you are having lunch, Helen, and Elon Musk calls me. And he says, Brenden, I really like your YouTube channel. Can you coach me tomorrow? I'll pay you $1 million. Would I get nervous? Yeah, I'd be a little bit nervous. So what's the punchline, Helen? There's always a level for all of us that we're a little bit nervous. Yeah. So what's the analogy I want to drive? The analogy is, for me, communication is like a boxing match. One side of the ring is the fear of communication, the anxiety, the stress, the nerves. And the other side of the ring is the message. Why is it important for me to share this with the world? Why is it important for other people? And the goal is not for the fear to leave the ring. The goal is to make sure that when your fear and your message meet in the middle of that boxing match, that your message wins the match, that your message gets the knockout punch. And that's what happened with me. I had every excuse not to start MasterTalk, but I did it for the 15-year-old girl who couldn't afford a communication coach.
Oh my goodness. Fear and your message meeting in the middle and your message winning out. That is very, very, very powerful, Brenden. And I would like to just add to that, 100% agree with that, because this is all about what you have to say about your experience, about your message. So don't even try to be a perfectionist. Don't worry about if you say ums and ahs or muck it up or get it around the wrong way. When people feel your heart, they hear you, and that's what matters most. So, this is so good. Alrighty. So, what are some other exercises you think we can just do in general to help us become better communicators?
Absolutely, Helen. So there's a lot of things we can talk about, but I would say in the context of the show, the one piece that I really want to drive in today's conversation is there's an important lesson that grief teaches us that a lot of us don't talk enough about, which is to treasure the relationships that we still have. Right. And that's why I made a conscious decision to live with my mom. She's not ill or anything, but I think about one day, and that's an emotion I'll need to process. Hopefully it's in 50 years, but it might be in 5. It might be in 10, where I have to hold her hand one day when she passes away. So I asked myself the difficult question, which is, what decision should I make? Should I live with my mom, or should I just move somewhere else and go keep blowing up my business and do all these things? And I made a very conscious decision to stay with her, because at least I would have these memories, whether it's 10 years or 5 years or 50, that I can live for the rest of my life. So that's one piece that helps us make us conscious decisions. The other piece that I think is important to talk about is how to set and communicate boundaries that are healthy with the people around you. Because those are the memories that you'll remember when they're gone. I call this relationship visioning. And I'll tell you a personal story that I think you'll find interesting. So when I was 13 years old, like every other 13-year-old boy with her mother, we would fight all the time, right? She's always like telling me like, oh, you can't eat at your friend's house. Like, how does this make any sense? And then one day when I was 15 or something, I asked her a question that very few boys ask their mother when they're 15. And that question was, why? Mother, why does this bother you that I eat at my friend's house and do all these things, which were like normal? It wasn't I was doing anything crazy. And she explained for 25 minutes why that bothered her. And the main reason, which made perfect sense to me, is when she grew up in Sri Lanka, Helen, there was a civil war. So when there was a civil war, all the doors were closed. She wouldn't trust everyone else. So when I listened to her, all I said at the end was, thanks for sharing, Mom. We don't live there anymore. And she just let me go, eat at my friend's house. Yeah. Why am I telling you this story, Helen? Because a lot of us, we focus on the relationship and the problems that we have with them. Oh, my wife is doing this, my husband's doing that, my mom's doing this. But we don't ask ourselves the more powerful question with the relationships we have today, because those are the memories we'll remember after they're gone. And the question is, what do you want the relationship to look like?
Yes.
What do you want it to be? Okay, sure, you're yelling now, but do you want to always yell? So when they're gone, is that the memories you want to remember? So I changed the way that I communicated with her and my sister, and we haven't argued in a decade, Helen. In a decade. I don't remember the last time I argued with them, and that's the key.
Oh, and that just reminded me exactly of when my daughter was 14 and she could run circles around me. She was so good at speaking and getting her point across, and I'd just get lost in it and she'd win every time. And so I thought, I can't be arguing with her. So, but I remember reaching a point and just saying, look, I don't know what it is that you need to get off your chest or you need to express, but we can't live like this. I can't live in the same house with this energy of us fighting with each other. So I'm going to get you somebody that you can go and speak to and you can let loose. If it's me, if I'm the issue, go for it. But this is your time, your space. You need to do it. Now, I'll tell you what, the reason I tell you this is because it only took a couple of sessions and I had a changed child. She was just amazing. And we went on to have the most unbelievable teenage years. She was still cheeky and naughty and all of those other things, just this beautiful teenager. But we had the most wonderful relationship. So when she actually died, I was so grateful that I didn't have all those arguments during her teenage years. I thought, wow, how lucky am I that we got to have these amazing years together. And I will always be grateful for that to this day. So I am very grateful to you, Brenda, for sharing that story, which just made me think of that one decision that I made about us being able to live in the same house and communicate better. Yes, thank you.
That was so powerful, Helen. Thanks for sharing that. And it's
Yeah.
something I'm grateful that I learned at a young age. And I hope for people
Yes.
who are listening to this, it's not too late to learn the lesson. Because as
No.
long as there's at least one family member left, which I'm sure for most of us, knock on wood, there is at least one, it's not too late. Right? So start having those conversations with them. Start documenting on a piece of paper. What would your dream relationship look like with that person? Right. And for
Yes.
some people, it won't be possible. Like even if I were to go back with my dad, I don't think I would have made it work just based on the season of life that I was in. But for literally everyone else in my life, I have a relationship vision for. With my cousins, with my new niece that was born a few months ago. Like I have it, so I'm able to show up in the right way. And as long as we can do that with at least one person that we're not already doing it for in our family, I consider that a big win.
Well, I consider the same thing. I had the same sort of relationship that you had with your dad, with my mum. And my mum actually passed when I was 23. So I was quite young as well. And so what I was always grateful for, though, was that everything that we went through made me a strong, resilient, more capable person, able to deal with whatever came up in my life from that point going forward. And I always remembered it wasn't the childhood or teen years I wanted or the relationship I wanted, but gosh, did I learn a lot from that really helped me out in the rest of my life. So that's what we're talking about here too, isn't it? So sometimes you can't change the relationship, but you can take what you're learning from it away as a positive. And that's what I'm all about here. Let's take the bad things and see what light is shining through them. Yeah. So we've had a fantastic conversation, Brenden, and I'm so grateful for you sharing these fabulous insights with us. I always finish off by asking a series of questions. So I want to ask you, what is the best thing that has happened to you so far today?
The best thing that's happened to me so far today. Let me look at my calendar. I want to do this question justice. I would say the best thing that's happened today was probably a call that I've had with my client this morning. He's a really sweet guy, really ambitious, and I'm just so honored that I get to work with him. He's doing a lot of great work, and I'm actually helping him navigate through his personal story, like some of the ones we talked about today. And it's an honor that he chose me. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Since you said today, if you said this month, I would have answered differently, or this year. But if you said today, that's the one.
Today is perfect, and I love that. I feel the heart in that. It's so cool. I love it. And you've obviously got far more on your calendar than I have, because I don't write everything.
I mean, that could be a bad thing for me. You never know.
Okay, what is your proudest moment to date, Brenden?
Today or to date?
To date, over your life, over your lifetime, what is your proudest moment, or moments? It can be moments.
Absolutely. There's definitely many, but I'll give you the most important one. Retiring my mother. I worked really hard in my tens, from the ages of 12 to 22. All I wanted was a corporate job, Helen. And the reason is because I knew if I made $100,000 a year, I could retire my mom. And yeah, that's the biggest thing. She just plays in the garden every day. She's in a month vacation right now in her home country, but she just gets to enjoy life now. And that's the greatest gift I could ever give her, and myself selfishly.
Oh my gosh. Don't you have the luckiest mum ever, having a son like you?
Oh, I'm the lucky one.
Oh my gosh. It is so, so beautiful. I love that. Okay. When you have moments in your day that are off, that are not looking good, and we have an expression here, when they turn to custard, what is your go-to, Brenden?
A coach taught me this. It's called the bliss list. So what you do is you make a list of 3 little things, not big things, little things that bring you joy, and you just do them throughout the day. So I'm happy to share mine, which people shouldn't copy, right? The goal is to pick your own. But for me, it's rapping. I can karaoke in 8 different languages. So I just I'm not a good singer. I just sing in between meetings. I dance alone in my basement, probably like an hour a day in between meetings. Mm-hmm. So that helps me a lot. And the third one is I have conversations like this. I really energizes me to talk to other people, especially when I'm in between like deep working sessions. So I love doing these to just talk to new people and meet cool people. So yeah, those are the 3 things.
That is great. I love those. I so love those. So what would you like to leave our listeners with around communication?
Absolutely, Helen. I would end with the question that we started this conversation with, which is, how would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? A lot of people think that when I ask that question that, is it about getting a job promotion? Is it about getting a sale in my business? Not necessarily. Because communication is every moment of your life. It's the way that you talk to your families. It's the way that you order food at a restaurant. It's the way that you make new friends when you travel. And when we realize, Helen, that communication is about leading a more fulfilling life, we can get more excited around it. Whether it's something a little bit more challenging, like dealing with grief in the situation or season of life that we're in, or something exciting like being proactive about the relationships that are in our life and finding new and creative ways to double down and triple down to make those relationships flourish. Whatever the answer to that question is for you, find it. Because if you do find it, you'll not only implement everything we talked about today, but you'll do it with a smile on your face.
Very, very powerful. Wonderful. Oh. So I'm going to share the links in the episode notes of how people can get hold of you, but let's just run through that now so that anybody listening can just go straight out if they want to go check you out. And you've also got a lot of free resources on your YouTube channel that people can just tap in and access, haven't you?
Absolutely, Helen. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such a pleasure. I learned a lot personally just listening to the different scenarios, and I really appreciate the intention you have for the show. Of course. So 2 ways to keep in touch. The first one is definitely the MasterTalk YouTube channel. You just go to MasterTalk, you'll have access to all these videos. And the other piece is I do a free workshop on communication every few weeks. So if you want to register for that, go to rockstarcommunicator.com.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Brenden, this is so much more than I imagined. And what I love about it is that during our conversation, you actually brought out things that I didn't expect you to be talking about around communication. Like, how would you like your life to change if you were an exceptional communicator? I think that is such a brilliantly powerful question to ask ourselves every single day, and it just certainly makes me want to be a far more effective communicator. So I'm going to keep on working on that. And Brenden, thank you so very, very much for sharing wonderful knowledge with us and your time today.
Of course, Helen, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button, and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.